My name is Amira, and I live in Los Angeles, California. I am 34 years old, and I lead what many would consider a dream life, a career in international finance that lets me travel the world, a beautiful family with 2 young children, and a partner whose love and support are boundless. On the surface, everything was perfect, or so I thought. I was raised in a loving home, surrounded by faith and family, where my identity was deeply intertwined with both my cultural heritage and my spiritual beliefs. Despite the outwardly perfect life I had built for myself, there was a deep sense of yearning, of wanting something more, something sacred. It was this feeling that led me to take part in Hajj, the pilgrimage to Mecca, an experience that I thought would deepen my connection with God and help me find spiritual clarity. The decision to make this sacred journey was not an easy one. With my career, my family, and the endless responsibilities of daily life, it felt almost impossible to find the time to truly disconnect from the world. Yet, deep within, I knew this was something I needed to do. The moment I made that decision, I felt a weight lift off my chest, as if my heart had been freed. I began preparing for the pilgrimage with a sense of excitement, anticipation, and devotion. Little did I know that my life would change in ways that I couldn't have ever imagined. The first few days of Hajj were everything I had hoped for. The sense of peace that washed over me as I stood in prayer among millions of others who shared my faith was unlike anything I had ever experienced. In those moments, I felt truly connected to something greater than myself. A feeling of divine unity, as if the earth beneath me, the sky above, and the millions of voices singing in unison were all part of a symphony orchestrated by God Himself. I felt my spirit expand, embracing a sense of awe and wonder that filled my entire being. But as sacred as the journey seemed, the reality of it quickly began to unravel. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon and the golden hues of twilight painted the desert landscape, I experienced something that would forever change me. A moment of terror so profound that it threatened to shatter everything I knew about the world, my faith, and myself. It started when I was in a quiet part of the sacred grounds, walking alone, as I had needed some time to reflect and pray. I had been walking for some time, the hum of the crowd still faintly echoing in the distance, when a man approached me. His eyes were hollow, his movements calculated. At first, I thought nothing of it, assuming he was simply another pilgrim, lost in the sea of people. But then, without warning, he attacked me. The physical pain was almost unbearable. His grip, his violence, the complete lack of control I had in the situation. I screamed, but the desert swallowed my cries. My body shook with fear and terror, my mind frozen in disbelief. This was a sacred place, a place of connection, a place I believed was untouched by evil. How could this be happening to me, of all people? In that moment of despair, as I lay vulnerable and broken, something profound happened. A light, not of this world, descended around me. It wasn't just the flickering lights of the distant city, nor the warm glow of the setting sun. This light was different. It was bright, pure, and powerful. A light that pierced through the darkness of my pain. It wasn't a physical light, yet it enveloped my entire being, filling every inch of my soul with warmth. The light was comforting, not frightening, and I felt an overwhelming sense of peace washing over me, drowning out the panic that had gripped my heart. And then I heard it. A voice, soft but clear, whispering my name, calling to me. Amira, my beloved child, do not fear. I am with you. The voice was gentle, soothing, and familiar, as though it was speaking directly to my heart. It wasn't a voice I had heard before, but somehow I knew it as deeply as I knew the very essence of my own being. It wasn't a voice of a human. It was divine, pure, and eternal. I felt no judgment, no hatred, no condemnation in the words that were spoken to me. Instead, there was only love, unfathomable, unconditional love. The pain of the attack still lingered in my body, but the emotional and spiritual pain seemed to evaporate in the face of this light and this voice. It was as if the very force of this divine presence was healing the broken places within me. In the midst of that light, I could feel my soul being lifted, my spirit no longer weighed down by the heavy burden of fear and pain. My body still ached, but I felt a deep, unspoken understanding in that moment. The world of suffering I had known was not the only reality. There was something far greater, something divine, that I had yet to fully comprehend. And in that moment, as the divine voice continued to speak to me, I realized I was no longer afraid. I had been touched by something sacred, something that transcended the pain I had endured. "Fear not, Amira," the voice repeated. "You are safe now. I will guide you through this storm." The warmth of the light intensified, and the feeling of safety it brought was unlike any I had ever known. It was as though the light had taken all my pain and fear into itself, transforming them into something beautiful. My thoughts, which had been clouded by confusion and fear, now began to clear. I felt a deep sense of surrender. I no longer had to understand everything that had happened to me, nor did I need to have all the answers. The light, the voice, and the divine presence reassured me that I was not alone. I was never alone. In the silence that followed, as I stood bathed in this divine light, something miraculous occurred. A new vision unfolded before me, a vision not of the world as I had known it, but of a deeper truth that lay just beyond the surface. My soul, once shattered by the horrors of the attack, now felt whole, complete. I felt myself floating, not in physical space, but in a spiritual space that felt both familiar and unfamiliar, as if I had crossed into a realm where the boundaries of time and space no longer existed. And in that sacred space, I felt a profound connection, not just to God, but to every human being, every living creature, and every atom of creation. I understood, for the first time in my life, that all of it, the pain, the suffering, the joy, the love, and everything in between, was part of a greater divine plan, a plan that transcended human understanding. As the vision began to fade, I knew that I was forever changed. I was no longer the same woman who had stepped onto that sacred journey. The sacred light, the voice, the divine presence, I would carry that with me for the rest of my life, no matter what I faced. And with that realization, I felt something profound stirring within me, something that transcended the boundaries of the physical world. The journey had just begun, and I had only glimpsed the first part of it. I don't know how long I stood there, in that mystical moment of divine light and comfort, but when I finally became aware of myself again, the world around me had changed. The pain that had gripped my body, the raw physical trauma still lingered, but the emotional and spiritual weight that had been crushing me was suddenly absent. My heart felt lighter, as though the burdens of my life, of everything I had known, had been peeled away, layer by layer, revealing something pure beneath. It was in that moment that I felt it, the transition. My body seemed to no longer belong to me, as though it were floating somewhere far beyond the realms of reality, beyond the confines of my physical self. The pain was still there, yes, but it seemed to belong to a distant memory, something I had already overcome. I felt myself slowly slipping away from the physical world, as though I were being drawn into something much more profound, something beyond the mundane constraints of time and space. The edges of the world around me blurred, like mist rolling in from the horizon, and I felt myself moving towards something. It wasn't a destination, but more of a transition, as if I were being guided to a place that was both far and near, one that I couldn't fully comprehend. I wasn't afraid anymore. I wasn't worried. The presence that had surrounded me, the healing light, the divine voice, was still there, but now it felt like it was guiding me through a doorway into something vast, something eternal. As I drifted further from the world I knew, the sense of separation from my body grew more pronounced. I could no longer feel the weight of my physical form. The sensation of skin, bones, muscles had all but dissolved. There was no pain. There was only a deep, unexplainable peace that surged through me, calming the once turbulent storm of emotions within. My thoughts, which had been fragmented and filled with the horror of what had occurred, became singular in focus. I was no longer a victim of the moment. I was becoming something else, something more than human. In this state, I could feel myself being embraced, held, not by arms but by an energy, a force that was incomprehensible and infinite. And then I saw him. Jesus. I didn't see his face at first, but I felt his presence. A presence so overwhelming, so full of love and compassion, that it made me weep without understanding why. He was there, standing before me, but in a way that was beyond physical form. It was as though his very being filled the space around me, radiating a love that knew no bounds. He reached out to me, his hands open in a gesture of invitation, as though he were offering me something I could not yet fully grasp. And then his voice, so gentle, so kind, spoke again, and this time it wasn't just words. It was a message that resonated deep within my soul, a truth that I had always known but had forgotten. "Amira, my beloved child," he said, his voice filling my being with warmth. "You are not alone. You have never been alone. You are safe now, and you are loved." His words weren't just comforting, they were healing. The words sank deep into the crevices of my heart, where the wounds of trauma had festered, and I could feel them slowly being soothed, as though his love were a balm for my spirit. I wanted to collapse into his embrace, to let the weight of everything I had been carrying be lifted away completely. But there was more. As he spoke, he wrapped his arms around me, not just around my physical self, but around my entire soul, lifting me as if I were weightless. I could feel his love like a powerful force that surged through me, saturating every cell of my being, every corner of my mind. I was no longer afraid of the pain, no longer afraid of the attack I had endured. In his embrace, the pain of the past melted away. The shame, the guilt, the anger, I could feel it all slipping from my body, dissolving into nothingness. I was no longer a victim. I was his child, and nothing, absolutely nothing, could separate me from his love. In that moment, I understood. It wasn't just my physical body that had been broken, it was my spirit, my sense of self that had been shattered. But now, in his embrace, I was being put back together, piece by piece, until I felt whole again. It wasn't just healing, it was transformation. The world of suffering, of darkness that I had known, the memories of the attack, the years of pain and fear that I had carried silently, it all seemed so far away now. The space I was in with Jesus wasn't just a place of peace. It was a place of rebirth, a space where everything I had endured no longer mattered. I wasn't my trauma, I wasn't my past. I was his beloved child, and I was safe. "Do not fear, Amira," he whispered, his voice a soft caress against the storm of thoughts still swirling in my mind. "You are loved beyond measure. You are free." And in that moment, as I surrendered to his embrace, I felt my body and soul, once again, beginning to reconnect. But this time, there was no tension, no fear, no pain. There was only peace, a peace that transcended all understanding. My soul felt as though it were expanding, as if it were being lifted into a higher state of consciousness. I wasn't just experiencing a vision anymore. I was becoming part of something greater, something divine. And in this place, in the presence of Jesus, I realized that the boundaries of life and death were not as rigid as I had once believed. I could feel myself floating between worlds, between the physical realm I had known and the spiritual realm that was now embracing me. I wasn't leaving my body behind, but rather my spirit was being gently pulled into the realm of eternal peace, the realm of divine understanding. For the first time in my life, I wasn't afraid of what would happen next. Death, pain, suffering. All of these things seemed so insignificant in the presence of this divine love. The light around me was radiant, pure, and unending. It was a love so profound that it surpassed human comprehension. And in that moment, as I stood in the arms of Jesus, I realized that I was no longer Amira, the victim. I was Amira, the beloved child of God, and nothing at all, could ever take that truth from me. As I stood in the embrace of Jesus, the boundaries between the physical world and the spiritual realm seemed to fade entirely. The heaviness of my past life, the trauma, the pain, all felt like distant echoes. The air around me was filled with a light so brilliant that it didn't just illuminate, it permeated everything, transforming it. The warmth of that light was more than just comforting, it was healing. It wasn't merely the glow of a presence, it was the essence of peace itself. A peace that transcended all understanding, a peace that wrapped around me and soothed every part of my being. Jesus' presence beside me was no longer just a comforting thought. It was real, tangible, and deeply intimate. I felt his hand reach out, not just to touch me, but to hold me in a way that communicated more than any words could. His touch was not just physical, it was a profound connection that went straight to the heart of my soul, grounding me in a way that made everything else feel insignificant. In his gaze, I could see the depth of his compassion, the boundless love he had for me and for all of humanity. It was a love that had no conditions, no limitations, no exclusions. It was the kind of love that accepted me in all my brokenness, my flaws, my failures, and yet still saw me as worthy. As we stood there together, I began to sense a movement, an invitation to go further, to step beyond the immediate experience of his presence into something even more profound. And so I followed him, not with my physical feet, but with my soul, as we walked together through a vast and expansive landscape, bathed in divine light. The very ground beneath me seemed to hum with life, and I realized that this was not a place of mere existence. This was a realm of creation itself, a place where all things came from, where love and peace flowed like rivers that could never run dry. In this place, time did not exist. There were no clocks, no schedules, no ticking seconds. It was as though time had no meaning here, and in its place, there was an eternal present, a moment that stretched infinitely, yet was perfectly still. I could feel the weight of my previous existence, my earthly concerns slipping away like sand through an open hand. The trauma of my past life, the memories of pain, fear, and violation, they had no place here. They were foreign to this realm, and for the first time I felt completely free from them. The space around me was unlike anything I had ever imagined. It was vast, but not in a way that made me feel small. Instead, I felt expansive. It was as if my soul had room to breathe, to stretch, to grow. There was a purity to this place, a holiness that made everything else seem irrelevant. The beauty was beyond description, beyond the limitations of language. It wasn't just the colors that filled my vision, but the very essence of creation itself, the radiance of love, the warmth of peace, the purity of divine presence. As I continued to walk with Jesus, I realized that I wasn't alone here. Around me, I felt the presence of countless others, not in a way that crowded the space, but in a way that filled it with love and understanding. I could sense the spirits of those who had come before me, those who had suffered, who had experienced loss, who had faced their own traumas. And yet, in this place, all of that suffering was transformed. The pain was gone. It had been transmuted into something pure and beautiful. Here there was no sorrow, no regret, no bitterness, only peace, only love. As we moved deeper into this divine space, I felt the embrace of what could only be described as mother's blessing. The love and wisdom of every mother who had ever lived, every nurturing soul who had ever offered comfort, every woman who had ever stood in the face of adversity and still chosen to love. I felt them all around me, whispering words of strength and reassurance into my soul. Their voices were soft but powerful, and with each whisper I felt my spirit growing stronger, more grounded, more whole. But it wasn't just the mothers I felt. There was something else, something even more profound. Divine redemption. As Jesus stood beside me, his hand still extended in love and comfort, I realized that this was the purpose of my journey, to find my redemption, not just in this life, but in the next. To be cleansed of the scars of my past, to be healed in ways I hadn't even known were possible. Divine redemption wasn't just about forgiveness. It was about transformation. It was about understanding that the pain I had endured didn't define me, but rather it been a part of the greater process of my soul's growth. It was a lesson in love and acceptance, and in the most profound sense, it was a gift. The suffering I had experienced had shaped me, yes, but it had also prepared me for this moment, for this experience of absolute peace, of eternal love. As we continued to walk through this radiant space, I felt something else stir within me, something I had never fully acknowledged in my earthly existence. The truth that suffering, in its deepest form, had the potential to bring about a deeper connection to the divine. It was in the darkest moments that I had learned to call out to God, to seek comfort in his presence. And now, I understood. In this divine place, I was being shown that all pain, when surrendered to God, could be transformed into peace. All loss, when embraced by love, could be redeemed. And in this realization, I understood the deepest truth of all, that peace, true peace, is not the absence of suffering, but the ability to find love and divine presence in the midst of it. The peace I felt now, the peace that enveloped me and held me in this sacred space, was not a fleeting moment, it was eternal. It was a peace that would stay with me always, no matter where I went, no matter what happened next. Jesus, still beside me, smiled gently. His full of compassion met mine. There was no judgment in his gaze, no condemnation, no disappointment. There was only love, pure, unwavering love. And in his presence, I knew without a doubt that I was loved, not for my perfection, but for my humanity, my imperfections, my brokenness. All of it was held in his divine embrace, and all of it was redeemed. This was the truth of the divine peace that awaited me on the other side. This was the truth of the love that transcended all suffering. And in this moment, I knew that I would never be the same again. As I stood in the divine embrace, surrounded by that ineffable light, I began to feel a shift within me. It wasn't just a shift of my emotions or my thoughts. It was a fundamental transformation of my soul. I had experienced pain before, real, visceral pain that gnawed at the edges of my spirit, trying to tear me apart. But now, in this sacred place, that pain had been washed away, and in its place, a profound sense of unfathomable healing began to take root within me. I felt the love of God, true, unconditional love, filling me in a way I had never thought possible. It was more than just a comforting thought. It was an overwhelming presence that filled every crevice of my being. Every corner of my soul that had once been darkened by fear, shame, and trauma was now illuminated by this divine, unconditional love. It was as if every scar, every wound, every painful memory had been transformed into a lesson of strength and resilience. I no longer saw myself as the broken woman I had been. I was no longer the victim of my circumstances. I was something greater now, something whole, something sacred. The love I felt wasn't just external, it was internal too. It was as if this love had always been there, buried beneath layers of hurt and fear, waiting for me to finally uncover it. And as I stood there, wrapped in divine warmth, I began to understand that this love had always been my truth. I had been searching for it in the wrong places, looking for validation and comfort from the world around me, when all along it had been within me, waiting to be awakened. I closed my eyes and allowed myself to feel the full weight of this love. There was no rush, no sense of urgency, no pressure to move forward. I simply existed in the space of divine love, allowing it to fill me to my very core. The more I embraced it, the more I understood how vast and boundless it was. It wasn't just a feeling. It was a reality that had always existed and that I had only now begun to comprehend. And with that understanding came the realization that this love, this unshackled spirit, was not something that I had to earn. It wasn't something that was given to me because of my deeds, my worthiness, or my perfection. It was freely given. It was an expression of forgiveness flow, not just for others, but for myself. I had been holding on to so much guilt, shame, and regret over my past. I had carried the weight of it for so long that I had forgotten what it felt like to be free. But now, in this divine place, I understood. The forgiveness I sought from others, from God, and from myself was not a transaction. It was a gift, and it was already mine. I began to understand that forgiveness flow was not about forgetting the past, but about healing from it. It was about acknowledging the pain, embracing it, and then allowing it to transform into something new. I had spent so much of my life running from my pain, hiding from the memories that haunted me, but in this place, I was given the freedom to look at it with new eyes. I could see it for what it was, part of my journey, part of the process that had led me here. And in that understanding, I found peace. The love I felt didn't erase my past, it redeemed it. It gave me the strength to face what had happened without fear, without shame. I no longer needed to run from my experiences. I could stand tall in the face of them, knowing that they did not define me. I was not the sum of my traumas. I was the sum of my resilience. I was the sum of the love that now surrounded me, that filled me, that healed me. The more I allowed myself to be enveloped in this love, the more I realized something else. The journey I had gone through, the suffering I had endured, was not in vain. In fact, it had been a necessary part of my spiritual growth. Every hardship, every tear, every moment of despair had been a stepping stone to this moment of unshackled spirit. And in that realization, I felt an overwhelming sense of gratitude. Gratitude for the pain that had taught me to seek God. Gratitude for the suffering that had opened my heart to the deepest form of love. Gratitude for the woman I had become, for the woman I was becoming. But even more than that, I realized that this love and acceptance was not just for me. It was for everyone. It was a universal truth, available to all who were willing to receive it. And in that moment, I understood that the sacred reunion I had experienced with my divine purpose was not an isolated event. It was a part of a greater divine plan, a plan that connected us all, that united us all in love and peace. The love I felt wasn't just personal, it was collective. It was the love of the Creator for all of creation, the love of God for all of humanity. And I understood that in this divine peace, in this sacred place, there was no separation. There was no judgment, no distinction between the righteous and the sinner, the innocent and the guilty. There was only love, only grace, only peace. As I stood in this realization, I felt a sense of divine peace settle deep within my soul. It was the kind of peace that didn't require anything from me. It didn't require perfection. It didn't require success. It didn't require anything at all. It was simply there, and all I had to do was accept it. Accept it with open arms, with an open heart, and with the understanding that I was already whole. In this place, I understood that I didn't have to search for healing anymore. Healing was already within me. I didn't have to search for love, for acceptance, for peace. They were already mine. All I had to do was embrace them, and in doing so, I would become who I was always meant to be. As I stood in the presence of such divine peace, a deeper understanding began to unfold before me, as though the very fabric of the universe was being unraveled to reveal its hidden truths. I could feel the pulse of creation, the flow of life, and the intricate, unbreakable connection between every living being and the divine source. It was as if my soul had been shown a map of the universe, and each piece of it resonated with a profound sense of truth. I was no longer a mere observer. I was a participant, a co-creator in the grand tapestry of existence. In that moment of sacred clarity, I was shown glimpses of my life, not as I had known it, but as it had truly been. The visions were not filled with judgment, guilt, or pain. They were filled with love, understanding, and grace. I saw moments that I had once perceived as failures, mistakes, or heartbreaks. And now, in the light of this divine wisdom, I understood them as opportunities for growth, lessons that had shaped me into the woman I had become. The first vision that stood out to me was of a time when I had felt lost, adrift, and unsure of my purpose. I had wondered if I was ever truly seen, if I was ever truly valued. But now, from this sacred place, I could see that everything that had ever happened to me, good or bad, had been part of a greater plan. I was never alone. I had always been guided, always been supported by divine forces, even when I couldn't see it. The sense of pure love that filled my heart was a reminder that I had always been worthy of care, of attention, of grace. I was shown moments when I had questioned my strength, when I had doubted my ability to endure. I saw myself, weak and vulnerable, standing before situations that seemed insurmountable. But in the divine light, I was reminded that my strength was not mine alone. It was the strength of the Creator that flowed through me. It was the same strength that had carried countless others through their darkest hours, and it had always been with me, even when I had felt the weakest. In this sacred place, I was also shown the power of forgiveness flow, not just as a concept, but as a vital living force. I was shown how forgiving others had freed me from the chains of resentment, anger, and bitterness. And I was shown something even more profound, the need to forgive myself. For so long, I had been trapped in the guilt and shame of my past. I had believed that I was unworthy of love, unworthy of peace because of the things I had done or failed to do in my life. But now, in this divine space, I understood that I could not heal if I held on to that guilt. I had to let it go. I had to forgive myself, just as I had forgiven others. Only then could I be free. Jesus showed me that forgiveness was not a one-time act. It was a continuous flow. It was a process of letting go of everything that had bound me to the past, of releasing the judgments I had placed upon myself and others. It was a process of embracing the truth that no one, not even I, was beyond redemption. We all, no matter what we had done or experienced, had the capacity for healing, for growth, for change. But there was another key lesson that I was shown, a lesson that at first felt difficult to accept. I was shown that my pain, my suffering, had a purpose. In the depths of my trauma, I had often wondered why such things happened to me. Why had I been chosen to endure such horrors? But now I understood. My suffering was not in vain. It was not punishment. It was a catalyst for my spiritual growth. It was a refining fire that had burned away the illusions, the layers of ego, and had exposed my true self, my soul in its purest form. I had been shaped by the very things I thought would destroy me. Witnessing truth became clearer with each passing moment. The divine showed me that suffering was not the opposite of love. It was an integral part of it. Love and suffering were not enemies. They were partners in the sacred dance of life. It was through suffering that we learned the true depth of compassion, the true meaning of grace. It was through suffering that we could learn to forgive and to heal. And it was through suffering that we learned the importance of love. Love for ourselves, love for others, and love for the divine. I saw too that my suffering was not unique. It was shared by so many others across time and space. I had always felt isolated in my pain, as if no one could understand the depth of my hurt. But in this sacred place, I was shown that suffering was a universal experience. It was part of the human condition. And yet, in the midst of it, there was always hope, always the possibility of redemption, always the chance for transformation. I was not alone. I was part of something much greater. Through these revelations, I began to understand that I was being called to embrace my own divine purpose. My sacred reunion with my true self was not just about healing my own wounds. It was about healing others too. I was shown that the very experiences that had caused me the most pain were the ones that would allow me to offer the most love and healing to others. I was shown that my story, no matter how dark it had seemed, was a beacon of hope for others who had walked a similar path. I was being called to be a light in the world, to share my story and my healing journey, so that others could find peace in their own suffering. In this divine space, I realized that healing was not a destination. It was a journey. And it was a journey I had to walk, not alone, but with others. My healing was intertwined with the healing of those around me. My sacred reunion with my divine purpose was a reunion with all those who had walked the same path of suffering and redemption. Together, we would rise. Together, we would heal. In the stillness of that divine space, I was confronted with a choice that seemed to stretch beyond the limits of time and space, beyond the very essence of life and death. I had reached a place of such profound peace, where the past, present, and future were no longer bound by linear constraints. It felt as though the very air around me held the answers to every question I had ever asked. And yet I knew that I had reached the moment of decision. The vision of the divine being before me, the figure of Jesus, stood tall, his hand extended toward me in an offering of love. His eyes were filled with compassion, but there was also a quiet strength in his gaze. It was as if he could see directly into the depths of my soul, understanding the very core of my being, the joy, the pain, the doubts, and the hopes. He had seen it all, and yet he loved me unconditionally. "Do you wish to stay?" His voice was soft, but it resonated within me, as though the very fabric of the universe vibrated with his words. I could feel the weight of the question, as though my decision would shape not just my future, but the future of everything around me. In this place of peace, I felt no fear, no doubt, only the overwhelming presence of love. I was safe. I was free. And yet I knew that there was something more that I had yet to experience. "I am whole," I replied softly, feeling the weight of the words. "I am healed. But what is left for me in this world?" The divine being smiled gently, his hand still extended toward me. "There is much more for you. There is much more to give." And then I understood. In that moment, I realized that healing, while profound, was not an end. It was a new beginning. I had been given the gift of life, not just to live for myself, but to live for others. I had been touched by the divine, not to remain forever in the peace of the afterlife, but to return and share that peace with a world that was often lost in its own pain and suffering. I saw visions of the life I had left behind. I saw my family, my friends, and the people who needed healing just as much as I had. I saw the faces of those who were still trapped in their own struggles, still burdened by their own pain. I saw the deep, aching need for love and compassion in the world, and I understood that I was being called to be a part of that healing process. But the choice was not an easy one. As I stood at the threshold of this divine realm, I felt the pull of the other side. The peace I had found here was so deep, so all-encompassing, that the thought of leaving it behind seemed almost impossible. The pain of the world, its cruelty, its suffering, its injustice, still loomed large in my mind. And yet, I knew that I could not remain in this sacred space forever. I had been given the gift of transformation, and that gift had a purpose beyond my own healing. In that moment, the divine being spoke again, his voice filled with wisdom. You have already healed, but now you must heal the world. You must take your light, your love, and share it with others. The world is not yet ready for you to rest. You have much to offer. The words resonated deep within me, and I realized that the choice was not between staying or leaving. It was about embracing a new path. The path was not without its challenges, but it was a path of celestial rebirth. I would be reborn, not just in spirit, but in purpose. I would walk forward into the world with the strength and love I had gained from this divine experience, knowing that my purpose was to be a guide, a light for those who were lost and in need of healing. The strength in silence filled me as I understood the depth of my responsibility. I was not returning as the same woman who had arrived at the gates of this divine realm. I had been transformed, reborn, and now I was ready to face the world once more, with new eyes, with a new heart. I would carry the divine peace with me, and it would guide my every step. The weight of the world no longer felt like a burden. It felt like an invitation to share the love and healing I had been given. As I made the decision to return, a sense of whispers of hope filled me. It was as if the universe itself was speaking to me, urging me to take the next step, to trust in the process of life. I could hear the voices of those who had gone before me, those who had walked the path of suffering and redemption. Their wisdom, their strength, flowed through me as I prepared to step back into the physical world. And yet, even as I prepared to return, I felt no fear. There was no anxiety about what lay ahead. There was only peace, only trust. I knew that the journey would not be easy, but I also knew that I was not alone. I had been given the strength to face whatever challenges lay ahead, and I would walk forward with the confidence of knowing that I was guided by divine love every step of the way. The choice was made. I would return to the physical world, not as a woman who had been broken, but as one who had been healed and transformed. I would carry the light with me, and I would share it with others, spreading love, peace, and healing wherever I went. As I took the step back toward the physical realm, I felt a surge of energy, as though every fiber of my being was waking from a deep slumber. It was as if I had been reborn, not just in spirit, but in body. The feeling was indescribable, like the first breath after a long, suffocating silence. My senses came alive with a vibrancy I had never experienced before, as though every single moment held the potential for joy, for peace, for healing. I opened my eyes, and the world around me felt so vivid, so tangible. The harsh sunlight, the gentle breeze, the scent of the earth, all of it felt like a sacred gift, a reminder that life, despite its struggles, was beautiful beyond measure. The pain, the trauma, the overwhelming fear, all of it had faded into the background, no longer holding dominion over me. It was as though the very air around me had been transformed, infused with the divine light that had healed my soul. I could feel the presence of Jesus beside me, not in the form I had seen in the divine realm, but in a way that transcended physical presence. His love was with me, constantly guiding me, reminding me that I was never alone. There was a quiet joy in my heart, a deep, unshakable peace that seemed to permeate every part of my being. But the most profound change was within my spirit. I no longer carried the weight of shame or guilt. I no longer saw myself as a victim of circumstances. I had been embraced by mercy, and in that embrace, I had been set free. I understood now that my past did not define me. It was simply a chapter in a larger story, a story of healing, of growth, of redemption. The most extraordinary part of my return was the awareness that I was carrying something truly sacred, a new life growing within me. The child I was now pregnant with was not just a symbol of my survival. They were a blessing of life, a tangible representation of the miracle that had unfolded within me. Every movement of that child reminded me that, despite the darkness of the past, there was always the potential for new beginnings. The child's laughter would be the music of my future, a reminder that life, even after trauma, could be full of joy, hope, and light. I no longer saw the world through the same lens. I could feel the heaviness of others' pain, but instead of being overwhelmed by it, I now saw myself as a vessel of love, capable of sharing the healing I had received. There was a serene acceptance within me that I had never known before. I no longer felt like a stranger in this world, but like a part of its divine fabric. I had learned that healing was not just an individual experience, it was a collective one. As I healed, so too did I contribute to the healing of those around me. I remember standing outside, feeling the cool breeze on my face, my hand resting gently on my stomach, and for the first time in so long, I allowed myself to smile. The past had been painful, but it was no longer my prison. It was a part of my journey, a journey that had led me to a place of profound peace and understanding. The heart's release had happened. I was no longer bound by the chains of fear, shame, or doubt. I had been set free, not by escaping the world, but by embracing it in a new way. I had been transformed in peace, and in that peace, I knew I had the strength to face whatever the future held. The trauma, the hurt, and the fear, they no longer had control over me. I was free to live, to love, to heal, and to offer the same to others. As I continued on my path, I knew there would be challenges ahead. Life would not always be easy, and the world would not always be kind. But I also knew that I was no longer alone. I had found my way back to a place of wholeness, a place where love and light could guide me through even the darkest of times. I had embraced my divine purpose, and now I would walk forward with love as my guide, knowing that I had been given the most profound gift of all, the ability to heal and to help others heal through the love that filled my heart. I was ready to embrace the future, ready to share the light, and most of all, ready to live in peace.